Traore versus Trump, the legal earthquake no one saw coming. It began as a quiet morning in Ouagadougou. No speeches, no parades, just the hum of ordinary life beneath a rising sun. Then, before noon, a headline shook the global order. Burkina Faso had filed a case before the International Criminal Court, accusing the sitting president of the United States, Donald J. Trump, of preparing an unlawful military intervention against Venezuela. The world froze. No African nation had ever challenged Washington in a court of law. Some called it madness. Others called it courage. But for Ibrahim Traoré, it was necessity. The belief that silence had become a weapon deadlier than war itself. To understand the gravity of that act, we must return to the moment that triggered it. 3 weeks earlier, in a dimly lit command room beneath the presidential compound in Ouagadougou, Traoré watched a flickering satellite feed from the Caribbean. On the screen were 5 U.S. Navy vessels drifting into international waters off Venezuela's coast. There had been no declaration of intent, no public statement, no UN consultation. Officially, these were routine exercises. Unofficially, they were something else. Burkina Faso's new alliance network, the AES, formed with Mali and Niger, had quietly intercepted encrypted communications between private defense contractors off the Florida coast. Among them were terms like D-Day -1, asset entry clearance, and post-evacuation extraction. The translation was clear. The machinery of intervention was being prepared, not for humanitarian aid, but for resources. Oil, gold, lithium, the same raw wealth that had long fueled wars, coups, and crises across the global south. For Traoré, this was not a Venezuelan issue. It was a pattern repeating itself from Libya to the Congo, from Haiti to the Sahel. A pattern where sovereignty became optional and silence became approval. His words to his defense counsel were simple. If Venezuela falls quietly, so will we all. But instead of choosing anger, he chose precision. Rather than threaten retaliation, he turned to the one weapon the West had always claimed to respect: law. Within 24 hours, he ordered the formation of a secret multinational task force. African constitutional lawyers, Latin American jurists, cybersecurity analysts, and former UN rapporteurs. Their mission: build a legal case proving that Washington's naval presence near Venezuela was not deterrence, it was coercion. The evidence came swiftly and brutally clear. Satellite overlays showed ships positioned directly over oil-rich maritime zones. Corporate memos revealed that U.S. companies had already been pre-authorized to begin energy stabilization operations in the Orinoco Delta, before any intervention had been announced. Intercepted contractor communications spoke of logistics for extraction and non-lethal evacuation parameters. When Traoré saw those documents, he didn't shout. He simply wrote one sentence at the bottom of the first page: "Let this be the day the world stops pretending." 10 days later, as world leaders prepared their speeches for the UN General Assembly, Traoré made his move. He didn't send envoys or hold press conferences. He filed an official complaint with the International Criminal Court, naming Donald J. Trump personally responsible for acts of coercive aggression and undeclared military planning against a sovereign nation. It was an act no African nation had ever dared before. The moment the ICC confirmed receipt, the global narrative trembled. Major news networks first dismissed it as symbolic, a stunt by a small country seeking relevance. But within hours, the document itself began circulating online. 62 pages of evidence, data, and reasoning. Every paragraph meticulously cross-referenced naval positions, corporate contracts, intercepted logs, and financial authorizations. The preamble stopped even the most skeptical readers in their tracks. It read, "We file this not out of hatred, nor vengeance, nor vanity. We file it because silence is complicity, and the time for silence has ended." While Traoré remained silent, his message was already louder than any speech. For the first time, the moral balance of the global South began to tilt. In Berlin, legal scholars debated whether a small African nation had redrawn the boundaries of international law. In The Hague, the ICC confirmed that a special panel would review the filing. In Washington, officials scrambled to dismiss it as nonsense. President Trump mocked it publicly. "We don't take lectures from some guy running a country with no coastline," he sneered during a rally in Texas. The laughter from his audience echoed through the microphones, but outside America, it sounded different. It sounded like arrogance finally meeting its mirror. That single insult became a rallying cry. Across the global south, social media lit up with one phrase: no coastline, no compromise. The message was clear. Small nations would no longer measure their worth by the size of their borders, but by the courage of their convictions. Back in Ouagadougou, Traore gathered his advisors. He reminded them, "We are not heroes, we are witnesses, and witnesses must not lose focus." Rather than capitalize on global attention, he redirected resources towards something unexpected: education. He approved funding for a new institute for international justice in Bobo-Dioulasso. He ordered the Rome Statute translated into all major Burkinabe dialects, and he expanded legal scholarships for rural students who had never even heard of The Hague before that week. He told them, law was once their weapon. It will now become ours. While Western media framed him as radical or anti-West, something deeper was unfolding. In Latin America, Bolivia and Timor-Leste petitioned for a UN subcommittee on resource militarization. In Africa, Niger and Chad sent requests to Burkina Faso for consultations on preemptive legal protections. What had begun as one filing was turning into a movement, a doctrine of dignity by law. Meanwhile, in U.S. diplomatic circles, unease grew. The White House didn't fear prosecution. America does not recognize ICC jurisdiction, but it feared something more powerful: the optics of moral defeat. For a president who prided himself on dominance, being legally cornered by a former soldier from West Africa was unthinkable. Traore's restraint was his greatest strength. He didn't answer Trump's insults. He didn't tweet. Instead, on September 23rd, he released a handwritten open letter, not to America, not to the ICC, but to the peoples of the world. It read, "We do not hate America. We fear silence. We have buried too many voices beneath oil fields and lithium mines. Let the law speak. Let those without power remember they are not voiceless. The path to dignity begins when we stop waiting for permission to defend it." The United States retaliated quietly, cutting minor aid, tightening visas, and launching disinformation campaigns. But Traore didn't flinch. He spent his days visiting hospitals, schools, and construction sites. He met teachers, farmers, and students. When journalists asked why he stayed silent, he replied simply, "Because truth doesn't need a microphone." He had shifted the world's attention without firing a shot. And that, perhaps more than any battlefield, was where history changed. The West had long imagined that power was measured in armies. But Ibrahim Traoré showed that in the 21st century, it might be measured in evidence, in words, in the courage to speak when silence had become convenient. For the first time in living memory, the map of justice itself had moved, from Washington to The Hague, from the deserts of the Sahel to the conscience of the world. And in that movement, the smallest nation on the planet's poorest continent proved that dignity, once awakened, does not go back to sleep.